Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sean Limley. I am the Director of Product Solutions here at Dominion Payroll. In today's world, cybercriminals, they're getting smarter. Payroll and HR systems, unfortunately, are prime targets. The consequences of a cyber event can be costly, disruptive, and downright devastating to a small business. That's why today's session is a very important one. Today, we are joined here by Stephen Lenderman, the head of fraud prevention with isolved. Steve here is an expert in cybersecurity strategy, and he's here really to help share insights on common fraud tactics, schemes, how they target businesses, and as well share some best practices of how you can help stay one step ahead. So before we dive in here, I do just want to send out a quick reminder. Today's session is being recorded, so you will receive a copy of the recording and the presentation after the webinar. And as always, if you have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A chat in today's sessions. We are going to try our best to address each and every single question as we can towards the end of the session. So with that, let me go ahead and turn it over to Steve. Steve, welcome.
Welcome. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Sean. Pleasure being here today, and looking forward to spending some quality time with the audience. We'll spend about 35 to 45 minutes going through some PowerPoint type stuff. I definitely want to leave some time here for questions at the end. I think it's really important to be able to answer those questions for you and give you some best practices as you attend the webinar. So I guess the question is, why are you listening to me talking about payroll fraud and best practices in the payroll industry? Have about 25 give or take years in the fraud space, a couple different diverse backgrounds between obviously payroll space, solution providers, fintechs, retail banks, credit card banks, business lending, et cetera. Been across multiple different industries. Also very active in several associations around fraud prevention, and do a ton of speaking and education and awareness at different conferences, webinars, et cetera, out there as well. So been doing this for a little while. Been with isolved for about 7 months now, and looking forward to working with you guys and giving you guys some more information around some basic best practices and what we're seeing in the payroll industry from a fraud perspective. So let's go ahead and then jump right in. And as Sean mentioned, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat feature. We'll collect them at the end. Happy to take those questions from you at that point in time. So what is payroll fraud, right? So payroll fraud occurs when individuals manipulate a company's payroll system for financial gain. One of the most important things that we should all understand after this webinar is that the payroll industry is certainly an opportunity for threat actors to take advantage of to commit fraud. And some would say, well, why is payroll vulnerable? And I think the most important thing that payroll folks will understand is that we think of ourselves as payroll companies, and we should really think about ourselves as a bank, right? And we think of ourselves like a bank. We start to defend ourselves like a bank, because the exact same frauds that we're experiencing in the payroll industry now are the exact same frauds that the banking industry has been seeing for the last 2 decades, right? And so think of ourselves like a bank. And when I say that, I want to stress that, do we receive funds as payroll industry? Yes, we receive funds. Do we hold funds in the payroll industry? Yes, we hold funds. Do we disperse funds in the payroll industry? Absolutely. That sounds like a bank to me, right? And so I really want to make sure you guys understand that you change your mindset. You think about payroll fraud, think about it from a banking perspective, that anything that can be done in a banking environment that can commit fraud can essentially be done in the payroll industry as well. And so that's what we're seeing right now. The old-fashioned payroll frauds around ghost employees and things of that nature, while they still occur, they are not what we're seeing from the bad guys now playing in the payroll space, coming from the financial sector into the space. There's the old saying, right? Why do people rob banks? That's where the money is. Well, the banks have gotten much better at fraud prevention, eliminating losses with tools, technology, and resources. And when the friction gets harder at the banks, for example, the bad guys are going to move to areas where there's less friction. And so they've determined that the payroll industry is certainly an industry that, while it does have some basic fraud preventions out there, they are still relatively immature and underfunded and under-teched to really defend themselves from a sophisticated fraud attack coming from these threat actors. So again, just keep in mind anything that can be done in the banking industry to commit fraud can also be done in the payroll industry as well. So we're going to dive into these next threat vectors right now. So one of the first things we're going to see a little bit, and it's been a real concern in the banking industry for the last 5 years, is kind of first-party fraud. This is when a good business goes bad. This is when you have a business or an individual who onboards or applies with your payroll industry, right, to conduct payroll. And ends up happening is that it's very difficult for fraud prevention and technology to determine what we call the intent to commit fraud, right? So when a first party fraud occurs, ends up happening is we see valid information, right? It is a true business name. It is a true business owner. It's a true address. It's a true phone number, true email address. It's a true bank account. Everything about the business and the owner themselves are legitimate because they're real. What we don't know is what the intent is of that business owner or the business to essentially commit fraud. So how would you commit fraud using your own business, for example, in the payroll industry? Well, one thing we tend to see a lot is individuals who have struggling businesses and may switch to a new payroll provider, right? And when they do that, they're coming to an organization to commit payroll fraud. They may exaggerate or manipulate their application to qualify for higher limits, for example, right? They may inflate their cash flow. They may inflate the number of employees they have in their business, right? These are all things that we use to justify how much credit they would have to basically run a payroll, right? So you'll see these things that take place that don't make sense, right? I went on a payroll for $50,000, only have 2 employees, my cash flow for the year is only $800,000, right? That doesn't make sense, right? None of the numbers match up. But these individuals try to manipulate the system using exaggerations and deception to essentially inflate their payroll to be able to essentially cash out, right? And so these threat actors will, knowing the business is going to go bad, will essentially run a high level payroll, high net worth payroll, and then they're kind of, we call one and done, right? They kind of disappear. In addition to the intentional opening of payroll fraud, payroll accounts for fraud, we see these individuals getting very aggressive with the threats. In other words, it's bad enough if the threat actor, the fraudster for this use case, does it once, right, with a particular payroll provider. But the way the payroll industries are set up is we're not connected, right? Think about when somebody applies for a credit card in your name, you're going to get an alert that your credit inquiry has been there, the trade line has been there, et cetera. So, there is this kind of consortium data called the credit bureaus that notify you as the consumer that, you have multiple inquiries or trades on your bureau. In the business space and in the payroll space, think of it this way. If I wanted to commit first party fraud, I simply could open a payroll account at company A, the exact same day do it at company B, the exact same day do it at company C, company D, E, F, G, whatever it may be. I can open 10 payroll accounts with 10 different payroll providers. And not any of those payroll providers would have any clue that I'm doing that, right? We call that stacking. We open several accounts at one point in time. You run the gig 10 times. So instead of just getting a $50,000, for example, payout with company A, I now can make that a $500,000 payroll, right? Because I do it 10 times with 10 different companies. None of the companies are any wiser. It all comes crushing down a week or two later, and then all payroll companies looking at each other going, how did this happen? What happened here, et cetera? Because again, there's no consortium and sharing of data among new account openings. Additionally, we see some of the first party frauds are not always going to kind of cash out, but they will manipulate their business obviously to launder funds, right, or to again move money through their account. So sometimes they'll divert benefit and tax payments. They will either not do taxes at all. They will create benefits for ghost employees. They will do different things to manipulate their tax liabilities so that they can again manipulate their revenue, right, the money they want to put in their pockets. So we see first party fraud is really becoming a major problem in the banking industry. It's going to become a major problem here in the payroll industry as well, for two reasons. One, it's easy to do, right? It's really easy to do. And two, the current economic situation is also putting pressure on individuals to do things they normally wouldn't do, right? They're struggling with cash flow, a new business opened up in the street that's taking their business. Maybe the business has just run its course, whatever it might be. And we start to see individuals with really kind of no end to the business. And they run this essentially first party fraud, cash out the business, walk away, basically bankrupt the business and say, listen, we're done. And again, walk away with more money than they should have. So we see that intention taking place in first party fraud. Beyond first party fraud, we got to get into what we call new account fraud, right? These are, again, businesses that are coming to your organization to open payroll, and they have either stolen the business identity or stolen the business owner's identity to manipulate that to open accounts for payroll, right? We can see, again, I mentioned the individual business owner can have their identity stolen. So as a threat actor, a bad actor, I can steal the identity of Sean, know that Sean owns a business, his identity, I change his email address and a phone number, but I can use his business, and I essentially use his business to apply for payroll, and I act like I'm Sean, right? But I'm clearly not Sean. An account gets opened up, I run payroll with some fictitious employees, including myself. I cash out the payroll, walk away with $50,000. That's how we do a new account identity theft business case, right? The flip side of that, I can actually steal the business, right, from the owner, right? And the business is still running their real business, they're running the real thing, but I create essentially what looks like a lookalike business from a business perspective. So it's very easy for me to go to several states and go to Secretary of State registrations, and I can essentially go on to these SOS sites. I can go in and change your registered agent. I can change your phone numbers. I can change addresses. I can change contact information. And I can do that with most of these states with zero authentication that I am the person to do this, right? In other words, when I go to, I'll pick on Delaware for the fun of it. If I know your business is in Delaware, I can go on Delaware's Secretary of State registration. I can pull up your business information. I can change the phone number, the address, and the agent and contact information to a bad actor. All right, and then from there, I now own that business according to the state of Delaware, right? Therefore, I can do things with it, like open payroll accounts, right? So we see the identity theft take place from an individual perspective and also from a business perspective, right? And we'll talk about some best practices around detection and prevention around that in a few slides. Now, fraud always gets more complicated, and technology has certainly assisted fraud. And no better example of technology helping fraudsters do things is in the space of synthetic identity, right? And synthetic entities. Now, I mentioned I'm stealing your identity as a business owner, I'm stealing your business, right? Both those things, eventually you find out, right? Eventually you find out as the owner of the business that your identity's been stolen because banks will notify you, maybe law enforcement notifies you, maybe you catch it yourself in your credit bureaus, etc. You may catch it as a business owner, right? Again, maybe all of a sudden you're getting bad reviews and you're getting calls for people that you owe bills to and past due. So eventually you find out, right? So what if I were able to create a completely fictitious person, right? This person is essentially a data ghost, right? It is a fake name. It is a fake social security number. It's a fake date of birth. Obviously, it's an address, typically a commercial mail receiving agency. It's probably a Google Voice number and a throwaway email address, right? So I create these synthetic identities, right, and use them as a business owner. And then I get more creative, and then I create a synthetic entity, right? Now, sometimes people call this a shelf and a shell company, but these are a little different. So a shelf company is typically used to make a business look older than it really is. All right. A shell company typically was used for tax aversion, tax evasion, or money laundering. But a synthetic entity is a business that's created specifically for the purpose to commit fraud. Now, the best example of that synthetic entity we can go back to PPP loans that took place a few years ago, where individuals were creating these synthetic entity businesses, applying for PPP, and then adding synthetic identities as the employees and the business owner, taking the PPP funding, liquidating that funding through payroll accounts to go to other individual accounts, which ended up obviously in bad guys' pockets and wallets and disappeared. So these are very, very difficult to catch because the data sources that we're using are very shallow data sources, right? And the bad actors know this. So when you look for these businesses, they're going to blend in typically with your small to medium businesses, right? You can think about our business portfolio that's out there. These individuals will create these businesses that are very small, micro business and fit right in with the typical business size that we see. Also, to put it in perspective, 530,000 new businesses open every month, right? And so you have this huge volume of new businesses. It's very easy for these synthetic entities to essentially get lost in all the new traffic that's coming with new businesses, right? So we see identity theft, we see synthetic identity and entities, and last but not least here, we see misrepresentation. This is where we have an individual who actually is an employee or a disgruntled employee within your organization who may receive an inbound phone call from a payroll organization trying to sell them payroll, or this individual may reach out to a payroll organization to essentially open payroll on behalf of the business without the business owner knowing that they're doing it or the authorization to do that, essentially. So if you're a disgruntled employee, I may open a payroll account. I'm going to pay myself a lot of money. I'm going to add my family, my friends, my cousins as employees. They're all going to get paid a bunch of money, right? And then I run that gig as long as I possibly can until you figure it out or until I decide to quit and walk away. And now we have, again, a legitimate, quote unquote, payroll account being opened up by a person that's in your business, but they misrepresented themselves as the authority to actually open those accounts, right? And so some controls we'll talk about around what we can do there to keep that from happening. But these are the three types of frauds we typically see in new account fraud setups. Now, once the accounts are set up, then we see we call post-account fraud strategies, and these are typically called account takeovers, right? This is when you have a business or an individual's credentials are compromised and used to initiate funds transfers out of the account, okay? An account takeover is nothing new. I began working fraud in the early 90s at a very large credit card company where we were dealing with account takeovers on a pretty regular basis. These account takeovers typically took place through call centers because that's how you dealt with your this is before self-service online. And now we've gone to self-service and online with credentials. Account takeover has become the crime of choice for threat actors. It is relatively easy to do, and it is easy to do because we are leveraging something that is no longer secure, which we call an email and a password. They are essentially significantly outdated and very vulnerable to fraud. We are trying desperately as an organization and as an industry and as a culture to get away from passwords and credentials and getting to passkeys and FIDO keys and that nature. So what does an account takeover look like? How does it work? Essentially, once I have your username and your password, I can go in and do lots of different things. In particular, around a payroll account, I would do diversion, which is probably the most popular. When I would go into an employee account and I would change their account from Wells Fargo to another account. Typically, we see bank account changes from traditional brick and mortar banks, like I said, your Capital Ones, your JP Morgans, your credit unions, et cetera, to these fintech type accounts. These are your Chime, Strides, Varos, right? Think Cash Apps, Venmos, things of that nature that are typically unbanked individuals use those accounts. They're very easy to set up, and they're typically self-service accounts. They are a favorite of bad actors to use to move money. Along with payroll diversion, again, which is the most popular, we've seen that almost all the time. We still see some ghost employee stuff happening there where an individual will compromise perhaps an administrator's past credentials, right? So they get into the administrator's credentials. They're able to add employees, right, to there, right? And so when I do a payroll diversion on an administrator account, what ends up happening eventually, right? Eventually, when payroll comes around on Friday, the employee is going to say, wait, I didn't get paid. What happened here? Like, where'd my money go, right? And so the gig is kind of up on the fraud, right? But what if I add a fictitious employee, right? Who completely doesn't exist, an employee who's not going to complain, an employee that I, as the threat actor, control, and the administrator does not realize there's a new employee that's been added to there, right? And so it's a really unique way to do an account takeover and play what we call the long game, right? When we see ghost employees that have been added through an account takeover attack, that ghost employee will sit for several months collecting thousands of dollars in payroll before an administrator notices, wait, who is this employee? What's going on here, right? So in ghost employees, a couple of things you can notice, they typically will have even dollar amounts. They would typically have very little taxes taken out. They will not sign up for benefits, et cetera, right there. They're just literally collecting a paycheck, okay? Additionally, what bad actors can do when they actually access an account, is they can delete other employees, they can alter employees, they can move money around. So typically when we see administrators who do an audit of their pay runs, you're typically looking at and saying, listen, I know our payroll is about $45,000 a pay run. Okay, it's within line of the last couple times, right? But what you're not doing is looking a little more granular. So if I'm in there again as a threat actor and I want to commit some payroll fraud, I will go ahead and essentially alter employees' dollar amounts and move their funds, maybe 500 here, 500 here, 500 here, 500 there, move it to a ghost employee or move it to another employee. So when you look at the audit, oh, it's still $45,000, but the reality is I've changed the accumulation of that $45,000, right? So look a little more granular than just at the overall dollar amount you're doing for your pay run. We talked about payroll diversion, changing those accounts. I'm happy to provide a list of what we consider high risk routing numbers to anybody who would ask. Doesn't mean they're always fraud. It just means there's more likely chance to be fraud. One of the accounts we talk to all the time is a company called Bancor. Bancor manages 39 other fintech accounts. But Bancor itself is not necessarily fraud. It just means that Bancor's routing number is associated with some accounts that are typically associated with fraud and therefore are higher risk. Additionally, the bad guys can change payroll amounts, the frequencies, taxes, etc. We've even seen a few individuals go in a little step further and they start modifying 401ks, adjusting benefits. They can do payday advances. They can do 401k loans, right? Again, anytime the user can access the account via credentials, they have access to anything the employee or the admin would be able to use, they can do to manipulate to commit fraud. So account takeover for us has become a very, very popular threat vector and one we're always looking to keep track of. But again, technology allows these individuals to do things that we have difficulty preventing at times. And unfortunately, the biggest problem we have around account takeover fraud is a human is typically at the root cause of the error here when it comes to credentials being compromised. We'll talk about a little bit about that here in the next slide. So I mentioned the human being the root cause of most problems here with fraud. Phishing and farming sites, again, nothing new. We've all been doing phishing training. I've been doing that for years and years. And we always ask ourselves, well, why are we still doing phishing training? Why do people still fall for it, et cetera? Why do bad guys still do it? The answer is because it works, right? Because it still works, because we're still using credentials that are based on a username and a password, right? And so we're seeing these phishing attacks still take place. We see spear phishing, which are targeted phishing attacks at a particular individual or an admin. And then we're seeing the sophistication of both these phishing and farming sites now that are being used to not only collect the credentials, but to actually commit the attack, right? So initially, phishing and farming attacks were designed to collect credentials, right? So that we would call it harvesting, looking for these credentials, and then they would be resold to other threat actors who would then use them to do the account takeovers. Now, because their technology has advanced so quickly and the barrier of entry for fraudsters has been reduced significantly through LLMs like Copilot and ChatGPT, right? Those type of LLMs like ChatGPT, Copilot, et cetera, obviously have rules and guardrails built around not to commit fraud. But the bad guys have access to things called Worm GPT and Fraud GPT, and there are 47 other fraudulent LLMs, large language model machines, that are available on dark deep web to do these things, right? And so a threat actor who may not know how to create a bot, for example, to use credentials and stuff credentials against the login page, now has the ability to use Worm GPT to write that bot, to write the code to do the bot, to do the credential stuffing, right? And so now we've seen our relatively low-level threat actors who have been enhanced by technology to commit much more complicated and advanced fraud. And so we're seeing these farming sites now, again, not are just collecting the details, actually doing the login, actually doing the payroll diversion, actually moving the money, right? And then logging out of the accounts all within milliseconds, right? Traditionally, an account takeover had to be done by a person who was going around and entering stuff, cutting and pasting, and you could see the kind of takeover take place from a behavioral perspective. Now we're seeing, again, very sophisticated attacks taking place with bots on these phishing and farming sites. Additionally, we're still seeing a lot of social engineering that takes place, right? Typically, you would see this in payroll when an individual is contacting usually an administrator who they've done research on, going through LinkedIn to see, okay, who's your HR director, who's in charge of payroll. They do that research on LinkedIn. They've identified their target, and they start attacking them with social engineering attacks. Could be through phishing emails, could be through LinkedIn messages, it could be through phone calls, it could be as simple as an email that says, "Hey, I'm one of the employees. I'm John Doe, the employee. My bank account was compromised by fraud. I need you to change my payroll account from X to Y, and you do it because you think you're doing the great thing for the person because they just had an account compromised. And next thing you know, you made the change for the bad guy, right? When the bad guy couldn't do it themselves because it's locked down, you as the authorized user, as the admin, have now made that change for the bad guy. You were socially engineered, thinking you were doing something right, and you're actually doing something that was fraudulent. So we're seeing a lot of this take place again through LinkedIn, by email, by text, the posing as an employee or a colleague, very, very popular now. And again, a lot of this stuff used to be really easy to detect because it was typically coming from non-English speakers, whether they were West Africans or Eastern European Bloc or Asia Pacific. But now again, technology, the LLMs are allowing them to write very targeted, very specific, professionally, grammar perfect text message emails, uh, and even scripts to get individuals to fall for these things. So last but not least here is credential stuffing. Believe it or not, your credentials are everywhere. They are everywhere. If you don't think they are, I got bad news for you. You're kidding yourself. In addition to your credentials, so is your PII, your name, your date of birth, your social, etc. I looked earlier this morning to see what a going rate for what we call a FULZ, an FULZ, which essentially means it's your full identity. And this morning it was going for $7.13 on dark web. So that just tells you that there's a lot of identities out there because there's a lot of them. There's a lot of supply, right? If the supply was low, price would be higher, right? But for $7, I can buy your complete identity. That identity contains your credentials, right? And so we are all humans. We are creatures of habit. We unfortunately tend to reuse passwords and credentials over and over again, especially in the small business space where individuals are using the same password for their payroll provider, for their Gmail, for their bank, for their Netflix, for their Amazon, right? It's all the same username and password, right? So once a bad actor has your credentials, they have the keys to your entire kingdom, right? So you'd be surprised how often this happens. So please, please make sure you change username, you change your passwords around, that you're not using them on multiple platforms. It just takes one breach to identify your credentials, and then those individuals will use bots to test those credentials across multiple platforms and identify what's good and what's bad, use them for the account takeover perspective. Last but not least, we still see some malware and keyloggers. These are more sophisticated, are typically used against larger targets, what they call whaling, going after big dollars here. This is much more complex and difficult to do. We're seeing a reduction in these mostly because it's a lot of work, and fraudsters are lazy. And it's much easier to do the prior three threat vectors than doing a malware keyloggers. But you'd be surprised how often this still happens. I do a lot of presentations, as you probably can tell. I go to different places and they say, well, can you give me your presentation on a flash drive? And I went, no, they're not putting a flash drive anywhere near my machine, right? I'm not downloading certain attachments. I'm not doing these things. I'm not scanning QR codes, right? I'm doing things that keep me safe from allowing my device to be ingested by a keylogger or malware, right? Yes, we tell people to run virus scans, etc. Please keep in mind that a virus scan is minimally 2 weeks behind the threat actors, right? So even if you detect that malware, it's been running in your machine for at least 2 weeks, right? The bad guys are constantly updating their malware again through technology with the LLMs. So it is a very complicated attack. So again, the best way to get around malware and keyloggers is not to allow that information that stuff into your networks. So turn off your flash drives, okay? Do not allow QR codes. Do not allow screenshots in your phone, your work phones, etc. SIM swapping is going to eventually die here, but there are still lots and lots of phones out there who still have a physical SIM card, right? Which you see in the bottom right-hand corner, right? Anybody with the newer Android phone and a newer iPhone, I believe iPhone 15s and above, you have an eSIM card, right? Which is in your phone, which means it transfers electronically from one device to the next. So SIM swapping will eventually die. but unfortunately, there's still millions and millions of phones out there that have the ability to have their SIM changed. And how a SIM swap works essentially is that I can now take your SIM off of your phone, right, and transfer it to a SIM that I now control. Typically, it's done through the mobile carrier providers. But once I can move the data off your SIM card to my SIM card, your device now becomes my device. Everything on your device, I now get, right? So anytime you do two-factor authentication with SMS, anytime you do mobile authenticator apps, those things, I can now see that because now I own your phone because I own your SIM card, right? Essentially, your phone becomes a brick. So one day, if you're wondering why your phone becomes a brick, and it's not working, you're not getting emails, text messages, phone calls, nothing seems to work, it's because your SIM was probably swapped and used to commit fraud somewhere else. And last but not least, here's man-in-the-middle attacks. These have been very, very complicated, but what we've seen in the man-in-the-middle attacks are kind of taking place in these farming incidents where they're allowing the bad actors to sit in the middle of a login session to collect credentials, including two-factor authentication. So an example of this is a farming attack where a bad actor puts a bad search engine result out there. A user clicks on that search engine result, thinks it's a legitimate login page, goes to the login page, enters their credentials. Those credentials are then passed to the true login page. But before they're passed to the true login page, the threat actor grabs those credentials. The threat actor then logs that individual into the true page, which typically will then initiate a two-factor authentication, which the user is expecting. User gets the two-factor code, does what with it, enters it into the fraudulent website. The threat actor now captures that two-factor authentication in that pass-through, and then passes that two-factor authentication again to the legitimate site. So what you end up having is the threat actor has the credentials and the two-factor authentication to access the account and make those payroll changes. So now you have a farming tactic that has a man-in-the-middle attack taking place with a farming incident. So when I mentioned the farming incidents are getting more complicated, that's what I'm talking about. Here we are in 2025, nearly 2026, and we're still talking about check fraud. Just to put things in perspective, I realize we're in the payroll industry, and I know we write a lot of paychecks. I get it, right? I get it. But you have to keep in mind that the United States is the only civilized country who still writes checks. No one else does. Like when we talk check fraud with my peers across different parts of the globe, they kind of laugh at us because they just go, yeah, you guys are still writing checks. So like, what do you think is going to happen, right? But moral of the story is we have them. I don't see them going away anytime soon. The small businesses are very reliant upon them. I'm sure organizations, I know isolved has a very large percentage of our pay employees are paid via paycheck. And that obviously puts a lot of our checks at risk. And how are our checks at risk? Well, they can be counterfeited. Pretty easy to counterfeit a check. Again, technology has enabled the ability to basically take a check and make it look legitimate through simple tools like PDF. There's a couple different other options that are out there. Some of the LLMs will create images of fake checks as well. Very, very easy to counterfeit checks. Wash checks. Yes, it's still very easy to wash a check. If you're writing a check or using print services that do not use gel ink or indelible ink, a little bit of acetone or alcohol, and I can essentially wipe the ink off the check and wash the check and recreate that check with whatever I want. And because we have moved a lot of our deposits to mobile deposit, we're seeing an increase in what's called double presentment, where a threat actor will have a check, will take it to a corner store, for example, a cash checking organization, for example, cash check there at the same time they're using a mobile deposit app and depositing the check in another place. And so now the check is being cashed twice. By the time mobile deposit figures out and the time the check goes through the Federal Reserve, the bad guys double dipped on that check and moved on, right? Check fraud is a massive, massive problem. It is not just a paycheck problem. It's a $24 billion problem. And it's just not going to go away anytime soon. So we're always trying to get individuals to get off paper checks, right? Here, so we create 180,000 paychecks per week. We are trying desperately to get folks off of pay paper into ACH or obviously other payment methods as well. So what happens when they have the money? They have to cash it out, right? So they have to get rid of it, right? The new account fraud, they need to move it to identities they control, right? Sometimes they're mules. These are mules or individuals who are probably victims of scams. They believe they're doing a work at home scam, for example. They could be a victim of a romance scam, or flat out they're just greedy individuals who are getting a cut of the money to receive the money and move money through their accounts. I mentioned synthetic identities earlier. Great opportunity again to use them to move money through one account to the next, because again, they're synthetic identities. They're controlled by the threat actor. They're not worried about them not moving the money when they're supposed to, or them getting scared to move the money. It's just easier for these guys to use synthetic identities than to recruit and find money mules. An account takeover, again, the employees are added. These can be synthetics, these can be mules, and the money is moved through payroll diversion. The cash outs typically happen to anything with a routing number. I know from my days at a prior payroll provider, we talked about uh, pay cards, right? Oh, pay cards are a big problem. Pay cards are a big problem. And the reality is it's not really a pay card, right? We didn't understand that a pay card essentially is nothing more than a debit card that's attached to a routing number and an account number, right? It's an 88DD number that's behind the debit card, right? And so pay cards are really a problem. It's the bank account that's the problem, right? So anything with ACH that can be ACH is a problem. We see a lot of these in the fintech space because they're very minimal KYC to open the accounts. They're very easy to move money across border now, right? To move money from transaction to transaction. You have different opportunities to move money through peer-to-peers. And the ability, unfortunately, to create and convert money from fiat, right, which is dollars and cents, into crypto are happening relatively quickly. There are several fintechs out there that are literally running a debit card associated that's tied to cryptocurrency. So they immediately change the fiat into crypto for you. And when these types of cards are used for account takeover and cash outs, the money is gone, right? Now we can trace the money through crypto. There is the ability to trace money through crypto. Doesn't mean you're going to get it back. I just know where it went. Doesn't mean you're going to get it back, right? So as soon as that money goes from fiat to crypto, you can pretty much consider the money gone at this point. So what is your best practices around new account fraud? If you're a business owner in general or just your own individual, like it's about cyber hygiene, right? Like how much of you are you putting out there, right? Are you really need to put stuff on social media? Do you really need to be on LinkedIn doing all this stuff out there? Just really think about yourself and understand, like, if I wanted to spy on myself or stalk on myself, how easy would that be? And you would be surprised how much information about you is out there for individuals to grab, right? And so just really think about a little cyber hygiene health check. Go out there and see what's going on. Please regularly check your credit and implement a credit freeze to prevent unauthorized access, right? I kind of laugh whenever we see that breaches that take place, and there's a bunch of them. Allianz Insurance was last week. I think Workday had one this week as well. The typical response that we see from these organizations is to provide credit monitoring. Little tidbit, little secret here. Credit monitoring only tells you when your credit's been affected. It doesn't stop anything, right? You are the best protector of your own identity. You have the ability as a consumer to freeze your credit for free. When you freeze your credit, you will stop anybody from accessing your credit. There's no need to have monitoring because nothing is going to get to your credit in the first place for you to react to, right? So credit monitoring is a reactive control. Credit freezes are a preventative control. So please go to a credit freeze. Do not rely on things like LifeLock, for example. They just honestly don't work. All right. Protecting your business, same concept. How much your business is out there. Now I know your tax ID number, your FAN is typically out there. Too often I see FANs on invoices. Like there's no requirement for you to put your FAN on your invoice. Like you don't have to. Like so don't take it off. Right. Monitor Dun& Bradstreet, your Experian, Equifax, and Better Business Bureau. Look for bad reviews. All right. Just monitor them every month. Put a little note in your Outlook or your Gmail calendar to do this. Please go do it. Additionally to Dun & Bradstreet and those credit bureaus, look at Secretary of State registrations. It's really, really important to understand. Please search those. Again, I can change your information on Secretary of State website, without authentication. Easy to do. No problem at all. And then limit access to sensitive data by using role-based access controls to restrict information. Too often we think, oh, that person would never do that to me. Well, a good chunk of fraud happens to come from what we call insider threats. These are disgruntled employees or employees who are under some kind of financial stress who would do something they normally wouldn't do. When you don't have controls internally, like dual signatures on or dual approvals on high dollar amounts, you don't have the ability to check and audit your reports. Like I mentioned, at the $45,000 and total gross sum, right? Look deeper into that pay. You need to really think about your controls you have there and based on your roles that are there as well. For account takeovers, it's also critical hygiene. Cyber hygiene is critical. You have to be able to understand what's out there. Please look at your accounts that are out there. Please use the password managers. Definitely help. Try to avoid using your email as a username. I know a lot of organizations, including ours and others, have email as your username. If you can, please do not use it. And the reason for this is pretty much this. You have two factors that are part of your credentials. One of them is your username, the other is your password. Your email address is relatively easy to decipher for your business. First name dot last name, first initial dot last name, whatever it might be. So half of your lock, half of your credential is essentially compromised because it's easy to figure out. So use something else for your username besides an email. Please do not use your email address and drop the domain name because that doesn't help either. All right. Think of passwords as passphrases if you have to, like I like cheddar cheese, something like that nature, right? Make it different. Do not reuse passwords, as I mentioned, across different platforms. All too often, I had a conversation with a victim of a payroll diversion, account takeover, not once, not twice, but 3 times. And the third time I finally asked them, listen, don't tell me your password, but did you actually change it? And they said, yeah. I added a 1 after the first time. I added a 2 after the second time, and then I got smart and I added an exclamation point after that. Well, guess what? You didn't change your password, right? You just didn't do anything. You just altered it, right? I need you to really change your password, okay? When it comes to two-factor, I know we're humans. We like to be fast and convenient. Email two-factor, I use the word satisfactory here. It's awful. Please get away from email two-factor if you can. It is unsecure. It is going to have to go away in the next year or so. So please get away from email if you possibly can. I know it's easy, it's de facto, but please try to get away from it. SMS is better, but again, less than ideal. Please try to get away from SMS. Authenticator apps are better, but not the best. A passkey is the best, and a FIDO is also great. Now, keeping in mind, when I talk about the account takeovers and these farming incidents, because the two-factor code is in what I call in the wild, which means it's visible, both an email, an SMS, and an authenticator app, think about that. Those codes are in the wild, right? An end user receives those codes and then enters those codes into another platform. When you have a passkey or a FIDO key, none of these passkeys are in the wild, therefore they are not susceptible to phishing and farming and account takeovers, right? So please try to get away from email, SMS, and authenticator apps. If you have to, they're there, but passkeys are the best. And then we always try to people to just be awareness, just understand, again, the root cause of 90% of all frauds, okay, is a human being doing something they shouldn't do, right? And that's hard pill for all of us to swallow, but it's the truth. So please understand the best way to get to these individuals who are doing things they shouldn't do is by some education awareness campaigns. I know they may not always work, but you have to do it, have to do it, have to do it. So I'm going to wrap up right on schedule, I think, here. We got about 10, 15 minutes left for questions. I imagine there's probably a few in the chat, and I'll turn things back over to Sean here. And I'm going to actually stop a share so we can just have better, I don't have to stop a share. We can just do it like this. So Sean, I will turn it back over to you and we'll go from there.
Right. Well, Steve, thank you so much. Really do appreciate lots and lots of great and wonderful information. We do have a few questions in the chat here, so just to address them live. What red flags should business leaders watch for that may indicate payroll fraud is happening internally?
Yeah, so one of the very first things that I would recommend is understand what your perimeter defenses are, right? And even as a small business, you should understand what typical traffic looks like on your website, or typical traffic looks like in your email boxes, right? And so you start seeing increase in traffic on your website, especially your login pages, for example. We start seeing increase in your traffic on your email. Those are anomalies, right? Those are things that are red flags that you should look for to see what's going on there. So it's as simple as look, some Google Analytics will help you with that. It's free to do, right? It's as simple as if you're using Office 365, there's analytics built into that as well as to use. I'm happy to kind of show you guys where they're at. But those are kind of some very first indicators of that. The second thing I would also is make sure as a business owner that you have the ability and the channel for individuals to report suspicious activity. Right? All too often they don't know how to report it. And so if you don't know about it, you don't know there's the incident, right? So give people the opportunity to report it and make sure they can report it quickly, right? Because when these things tend to happen, there's time sensitive, right? You do not want to wait weeks and months to do this because the money is long gone. Additionally, I would say an increase in your money movement, right? For example, obviously, right? If things start to go a little out of whack, now depending, obviously, with businesses, you have seasonality with your revenue and your cash flow. Totally understand that concept. You start seeing things that are a little out of whack that don't make sense from your seasonality or historical cash flows. Don't be afraid to dive in there a little bit deeper and look through some audit trails and see what's going on from that perspective.
Perfect. Thank you.
Sure.
We have two other questions here that kind of go hand in hand. They start off, do you have any advice for how I can train employees to spot phishing emails or suspicious activities? And then do you have any suggestions for resources for training people to avoid these threats?
Yeah. So obviously training is critical. It can be done internally. Most organizations refer to a third-party vendor to do that. There are several that are out there. I'm not going to really say who they are because I'm not going to, I'm not endorsing one or the other, for example, but I would highly recommend that every small business spends a little bit of money to go and get these third-party providers to do the phishing and farming testing, right? What you're going to spend in that test is going to be a fraction of what it costs you to mitigate the fraud, right? Not just from a dollar perspective, but from a time perspective, but from a reputational and even a regulatory perspective, right? And so a little bit of prevention goes a long, long way. It's really important to get those companies are really good at it. They can make them, they already have their experts at it. They have the exercises built, et cetera. Other thing I would also ask is if you're a small business and you have a marketing department, just be mindful of your messaging you send, right? And we're all guilty of this. And I even remind our marketing team we always tell people don't click on links, and then we send emails out. Click on this link to enter this sweepstakes. Click on this link to do this training, right? So we're kind of sending mixed messages to our folks, right? And so try to eliminate this messaging with links in it if you can, right? Hey, there's a new training. It's in your portal, right? Go to your portal to log in, and you don't give them a place to link, right? You let them go there and log in. That's really, really helpful to do. I would eliminate QR codes. They're just as susceptible as well. But yeah, third-party providers are the best that's out there. There's probably local providers as well. The best case scenario to do that, yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you so much. All right. Well, Steve, thank you so much for your time. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all so much for joining us today. Obviously, fraud is a very serious matter, something that no business can afford to take lightly. So hopefully everyone's walking away here a little bit more informed, has a little bit more steps on how to potentially identify as well as help prevent and protect your business. If you do have any questions coming out of today's sessions, please do not hesitate to reach out to Dominion Payroll. We are absolutely here to protect you. So I just wanted to say on behalf of Steve and everyone here at Dominion Payroll, thank you again so much for joining us today. We really do
Sure.
appreciate
And I'm also going to send just closing reaction. HaveIBeenPwned.com. You can search your emails and your passwords to see they've been compromised. It's run by the FBI. It's a legitimate site. HaveIBeenPwned.com. So that'll give you some ideas to see what your exposure looks like from that perspective. So again, I appreciate Dominion for having me and Sean's hospitality. Any other questions, you can certainly shoot them over to Sean, or you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to answer those questions for you at a later time. So a privilege and an honor. Thank you very much, Sean.
it. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day.
Have a great day, guys. Thank you.